You are listening to the IoT for All Media Network.
Well, welcome, Andrew. Thanks for taking some time today to talk to me.
Oh, it's great to be here, Ryan. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'd love to kind of start off this conversation with a quick introduction on your part, just to kind of give our audience some insight into who they're listening to.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Andrew De La Torre. I work for Oracle Communications.
Hmm.
I'm actually the Group Vice President of Technology here, where I kind of look after the strategy function, technical sales
Okay,
consulting, product marketing, and product management.
fantastic. And tell us a little bit more about Oracle. I mean, obviously, it's a big company. You have tons of different things going on there. But in the area that you specifically work on, and the survey that we're going to get into in a second, and those results, which the part of the organization kind of focused on that, and tell us a little bit more about what you all do.
Yeah, so we're in a part of Oracle which is called the vertical business units.
Okay.
We're a global business unit, and this is a collection of business units that are specifically looking towards industry verticals.
Mm,
We are obviously focused on the communication side of things, really focusing on delivering network and communications types of products to communication service providers and large enterprises. And of course, that crossover between large enterprise and communication service provider is really, sort of the whole reason why we're looking into the IoT area.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, regarding kind of the focus of our conversation today, the research you all done, the survey you did and released, I believe it was last week it came out regarding kind of the results. So, tell us a little bit more about the survey. Kind of what was the purpose behind it, the whole the initiative, and kind of why it was sent out.
Yeah, so Oracle's already very active in the IoT space. We
Sure.
have a number of capabilities that we have out in the market. But, we already knew from talking to our customers that the market was shifting quite radically in terms
Okay.
of its consumption behaviors. So really the purpose of this survey was to go out to some of the major IoT program execution enterprises in the world and get a better understanding of what was changing in that market and the kind of new trends that were emerging.
Sure.
So, we went out to 800 of the largest organizations. We specifically wanted these to be uh, people who had a reasonable amount of experience in executing IoT
Okay.
programs, and really, it was a set of questions to get a better understanding of what they were working on and the way they were now looking to deploy these types of solution.
Gotcha. And were these all individuals that work and deploy solutions, or is there also a mixture of kind of those on the buying side as well?
Yeah, it was absolutely a mix of
Okay.
people from execution and buying, but what we wanted to make sure that we were talking to the main decision makers in the businesses.
Fair enough.
So
Yeah.
these were the people who were really, making those decisions as to who they work with and the way that those programs get configured.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I saw some of the results that were very interesting, and I assume you had to talk to both sides in order to kind of get those numbers. But regarding the results, to tell us a little bit about any statistics that surprised you, any kind of takeaways from the report that really stood out to you, and if you think this is kind of an indication of any larger trends that may be forming in the space.
Yeah, I think the thing that probably surprised me most was the way that this indicated the rate at which the market is moving forward.
Okay.
And you could use the word maturing, but maybe we'll come back to
Sure.
that a little later in the discussion. Because one of the things that really stood out was that 90% of the projects that the people that we surveyed are actually executing were
Hmm.
classified as fundamental or very important to their business,
Okay.
and over 50% of those were external facing programs. Now, this is a marked shift away from where you've typically seen a lot of IoT activity, which is in kind of more internal and non-core projects,
Right.
perhaps focused on trying to drive efficiencies in business. But what they're now doing is they're touching, the very fundamentals of their business operations and the services that these enterprises deliver to their own customers.
Hmm.
So that, is a big kind of shift forward in terms of the role that IoT is starting to play
Sure.
within those kind of customers. I think the other thing that stood out as particularly interesting was the way that the delivery times are starting to shrink as well.
Mm.
And we saw in the survey on average about a 23% reduction versus some data that had been available around a year previous to that
Hmm.
in the execution time. So average projects going down to about 8 months from an average previous of 11 months. And so I think, this is again another indicator of a market that's really getting its arms around what it is to deploy IoT and, actually really trying to use it in a more powerful and pervasive way.
So regarding that kind of the last statistic you mentioned about the speed to basically market in a sense of getting these solutions out there more quickly, one of the things I saw was really interesting about the research was that there was a shift from interest from especially the buyers on these going away from more of the custom built offerings to kind of off the shelf, more of it's kind of ready to go from the beginning type offerings. What have you seen, or like, what other details can you provide kind of on that part of the conversation, and where do you think that's kind of helping the industry kind of move forward?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, that the results definitely showed that propensity to move away from those customized offerings and to
Hmm.
more off the shelf type solutions. And I do think there's a couple of drivers that are behind that.
Yeah,
That certainly the speed of deployment is one of them. And I mentioned that we're seeing, a marked shift in the time it takes for these projects to be executed.
yeah,
And that is definitely, not sort of by chance. It is intrinsically linked to the move towards more off the shelf type solutions,
sure,
and clearly the businesses want to be able to get to market a lot quicker. But the other thing is when you look at some of the cost sensitivities that the people we spoke to are identifying, they're definitely highlighting in their top three that the cost sensitivities exist around the deployment cost, around the operational costs, and hardware features up there very high as well.
sure,
And so again, if we look into some of the statistics, there were 64% of the respondents who said that they would be looking to commercial off-the-shelf hardware. I think all of this is in a large part trying to drive towards making these more cost-effective solutions, which is why they're moving closer and towards these off-the-shelf offerings. I think one final dimension I would add in is I do feel that as they are taking these types of solution into their core business and into the services that are really fundamental to their operations, they're actually less willing to take the chances around the complexity and the risk that comes with highly customized solutions.
sure.
So they're kind of really looking towards these off-the-shelf solutions because they're more proven, they're more stable, and they're more predictable in terms of the kind of outcome that they can expect.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, as you also think about just us as people that make buying decisions, we like, with IoT in particular, it's something that has a lot of moving parts, a lot of different components, a lot of different areas we need to understand, which oftentimes can become seemingly complex to the end user, the buyer. So the more we can make these purchasing decisions more easy, and we kind of focus more on the benefits, the results, as opposed to the technology, which that kind of what these more off the shelf type solutions seem to do. I think the better chance we're going to have to see kind of adoption continue to increase across the board.
Yeah, I agree completely with that.
So one other thing I wanted to bring up also was that in the survey you had about 75% of the decision makers wanting to have connectivity and other components of this built in or kind of baked in to the offering. Why do you think this is significant?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think this is another sign of the market actually maturing, because the users are really moving from a world where IoT was largely around just getting the device connected, and therefore
Sure.
connectivity was really a central part of what they were trying to achieve. But it's less about that now, and it's much more about the outcomes that these kind of solutions are delivering at a business level, either the
Right.
service
Right.
they're enabling or the change that they're affecting in a business process. So I think what you're firstly seeing is the attention shifting away from connectivity because it's no longer the central theme as to what they're trying to achieve from the solution.
Right.
It was particularly interesting to me to note that 25% of the respondents were actually happy for that connectivity to be
Mhm.
entirely transparent to them.
Sure. Sure.
So, not even a visible part of the solution that they were buying, which, again, I think reinforces this whole sort of idea that they're really focusing on the rest of the attributes that the solutions are bringing to bear for them. Now,
Absolutely.
I think one interesting reflection on this, of course, is you could view this as another sign of an increasing commoditization of the connectivity part of this, which
Sure.
you could say, if you were, for example, a service provider, could be particularly bad news. But I actually have a slightly different view on that, because
Okay.
I don't think that this is a bad sign, in that these are becoming things that are baked into the solution, expected to be baked in,
Sure.
because I see this less about it becoming commodity and more about being a fundamental expected part of the solution going forward,
Absolutely.
and less viewed as some kind of optional extra. And what that means is, from a service provider perspective, they can see that IoT is really going to have connectivity at the very heart of it, forevermore.
Sure. I mean, it's a requirement, and the better we're able to match the different types of connectivity with the use case, to make it not just affordable but also make it as useful as possible. I think that's one of the biggest keys, and also one of the biggest areas a lot of companies are very confused about. I mean, you have everything from the cellular IoT solutions. You have everything. You go, LP WAN. You're getting into LoRa. You're getting into all different types of connectivity out there. They just don't know how to adapt them, or which one's right for theirs, which kind of ties into another interesting point, is with the introduction of 5G. What are your all thoughts on kind of how that's playing a role in new use cases coming to the market?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I have to say, I think IoT and 5G have
Okay.
something of a symbiotic relationship with each other now. When you think about where both of those, let's call them technologies for want of a better word, are in their life cycle, 5G as a technology really needed IoT. It needed a market opportunity. It needed an application that was going to be able to take cellular technology beyond the handset consumer device market.
Hmm.
So, for 5G, I think, to have a purpose in life, it needed to really attach itself and be a fundamental part of what IoT could be. And I think at the same time, IoT had reached a point in its life cycle where it needed to go, large scale. And
Sure.
it was moving, as well, as we mentioned earlier, from the kind of low-hanging fruit of applications, the more simple back office automation that was happening, to
Hmm.
things that are really business critical in enterprises. And that brings a whole load of new, expectations and requirements on the connectivity component.
Sure.
So I think for IoT to move into that new service space and to be able to scale, it needed a technology like 5G to be able to give it the platform to work off. Now, if I
Mm.
if I make a little bit of a connection maybe between those two things,
Sure.
I mean, obviously, what 5G brings to bear for IoT is the enhancements in the connectivity itself, the
Sure.
characteristics of
Sure.
the
Sure.
connectivity. So, the higher speeds, although I think more importantly, the capacity that those speeds bring with them, the lower latency, the reliability that's
Yep.
inherent in cellular
Yep.
technology. That's
Yep.
all kind of one part of what it brings to the table.
Sure.
But I think what is going to become much more evident in the years to come is the less obvious part, which is the service agility that 5G brings.
Okay.
And if you think a little bit about the architecture of 5G up in the core now, and think less about the radio interface and that connectivity in the last mile, and think about a core that is now cloud native, think about a core that
Sure.
has a completely distributed architecture, enabling services to deploy it out at the edge, to be able to deploy processing capabilities out at the edge.
Hmm.
This is actually giving you a degree of flexibility in your ability to spin up new services that didn't exist in previous generations of cellular technology. And I think
Sure.
that service agility is the thing that is actually going to be really key as
Yeah.
we move forward.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you anymore. One thing I wanted to kind of jump into before we finish up this conversation is talking more about the industry and the different sectors that IoT is affecting. From your perspective over at Oracle, how do you all kind of feel that the deployments and the usage of IoT solutions is varying and will vary based on different industries? And do you have any kind of examples that maybe we're sharing?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, you can see from the survey that there's almost universal adoption across all the vertical
Sure.
industry segments. So, it would be disingenuous to say some industries are not moving on IoT, because it's definitely not the case. But I have to say, there are definitely particular industries where we have seen events that have stimulated and are accelerating the adoption. And if I
Mm,
kind of go across just a few of them, I guess one that's very, prescient to us all at the moment is healthcare. And the pandemic has had an enormous effect on driving the shift towards telemedicine type techniques, having more clinical trial solutions like the CDC's V-Safe, solution that they
yeah,
use on the back of the vaccination program. So you see a lot more IoT activity in the healthcare sector because
absolutely.
of the shift that the pandemic has really indicated,
Yep.
into that segment. Then you could go to a different space like utilities, where the whole decarbonisation of that industry is actually meaning that when you look at their power generation grids, they're far more distributed now.
Mm-hmm.
It's less about a handful of centralized big coal powered or whatever
Sure.
distribution centers. It's more about solar and wind farms, and this distributed grid, it has put a lot of pressure on that industry to be
Yeah.
able to track it, to monitor it, to sensorize the whole environment. So you see a lot of pressures in industries like that to really embrace IoT to help them
Yeah.
with the journey they're going on there. So just a couple of examples there.
No, that's fantastic. I appreciate you kind of diving into that. And the last question I have for you before we finish up here is, how do you all at Oracle kind of anticipate that these findings, everything that you did through this entire process, is really going to drive business strategy, contribute to the growth of the industry as a whole, not just for you all obviously, but for all those that will read it, have read it, will digest it and kind of take this forward with them.
Yeah, I think depending on who you are reading this report, there's a number of of different takeaways you can
Hmm.
have. I think if you are an enterprise and you're thinking of embarking on IoT deployments, there's some really important takeaways that you'll find in this report, that will help you think through the best way to run a project and the way to to build the best solutions. And that's
Okay.
from the peer group. That's
Right.
that's
Right.
not from Oracle. That's from talking to people who are doing it out there in the market.
Yep.
I think from an Oracle perspective, certainly, there's a number of quite important takeaways for us that we need to reflect on strategically. The first one I would highlight is the way that the market has definitely started to gravitate towards platform providers as the
Sure.
go-to people, right?
Sure.
And
Sure. Sure.
over 56% of the people that we spoke to here indicated that they would consider a platform provider in their top three choices, the IoT provider for their
Okay.
solution.
Interesting.
So I think looking at the way that the market is starting to orbit more around the people who have those platforms is a really important strategic consideration. The second one is the way that we're increasingly seeing a leaning towards analytics and the consumption and analysis of data that comes from these IoT things. And 70% of the people that we polled actually indicated that they wanted data and analytics tools rolled into their IoT solutions.
Sure.
So this is a real critical shift, I think, which is once more we're seeing a marked move away from IoT being just a way to connect things and to collect
Absolutely.
things,
Right.
but more about how can you now also take advantage of all of this data and start to get more valuable insights from that kind of information.
I think the more we see this adopted across industries and the more we see these solutions go through the pilot stage, get to scale, and then that data that you're talking about able to not only be collected but interpreted, and then those success stories, in a sense, are more publicly known. I think you're going to start to see a lot or more rapid increase in the adoption of IoT solutions in tons of different industries. So, we've talked about having the connectivity and even other components baked into the solution and how important that is, the ability to kind of buy what it feels like an off the shelf type thing and not have to worry about heavily customizing these solutions. All these things are just contributing to making IoT more efficient, more effective for an organization, and just a better case for that for organizations as to why IoT can really benefit your business. And I think this report shed a ton of light on it from a very interesting angle that has not been really covered that well. As funny as that may sound, like talking to the people actually making the decisions on IoT solutions within organizations that are either building them or buying them, those are the people that are really dictating kind of how the business is getting done on the IoT side and where the market's going. So we really appreciate you all taking the time to put this together and publish it. So for our audience out there, where can they find this to kind of read more, learn more about it?
Yeah, so listen, please come to the Oracle website.
Mm-hmm.
The report is linked out from the press release that we put out last week, and take a look at that. And while you're there, please take a look around some of the other Oracle stuff, which is really interesting from a point of view of the capabilities we've got in this space.
Fantastic. Well, Andrew, I really appreciate your time kind of jumping in here today quickly to talk to me. We're going to get this out today so our audience kind of can get up to speed on everything if they haven't seen the report yet from the survey you all did. But if not, please go check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. And thanks again.
Thanks, Ryan. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks again for watching the IoT for All Media Network. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell notification so you get our latest videos as soon as they become available. But other than that, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.